So it's the first question. In the mainstream media, Iran is described as the most dangerous country in the world right now. Is it true? If we base our opinion on facts, like how many people got killed by an attacking country after World War II, which countries are the most dangerous and most likely to attack again?
The United States by a huge margin. Nobody's even close. There are plenty of atrocities going on in the world. So in the Congo, for example, Eastern Congo, maybe 5 million people have been killed recently, but there's no single country that's doing it. Probably Rwanda is the most guilty, but didn't kill 5 million people. On the other hand, the United States, in Indochina alone, the United States killed several million people, and that's only the beginning. There are countries that have killed their own populations, and that's not a simple calculation. So, for example, China is well known to be, since the Second World War, a country under Mao, where many people were killed, like in the Great Chinese Famine in the late 1950s. Maybe 25, 30 million people were killed, which is quite a lot. Now, nobody claims that Mao killed them purposely. The only serious claim is that it's pretty much the one that Amartya Sen, Nobel laureate in economics, who specializes on this, what he pointed out, he argued this is a political famine because the totalitarian system did not permit information to flow, so that by the time the center knew about what was happening, it was too late to do anything about it. Mm-hmm. And in the event, tens of millions of people died. But that's a big atrocity, undoubtedly. In fact, there's a famous book, the Livre Noir, this Black Book of Communism, which claims that 100 million people were killed by communism. And this particular event, the Chinese famine, is the biggest chunk of that. So that's a lot of people killed. On the other hand, if we look a little farther, we find something else. Amartya Sen, same expert, who's maybe the leading specialist on famines. He compared, he and a colleague, Jean Tres, compared China and India from liberation, late 40s, up until 1979, the year when China initiated the reforms, so the Maoist period. And they discovered that during this period, democratic capitalist India had killed 100 million people as compared with China. The reason, and they say, well, this too was a political killing. It was just that India, under the democratic capitalist system, did not institute the kind of health reforms, rural doctors, rural clinics, and so on, that China did. And the difference in mortality, they estimated about 100 million. Mm-hmm. The way they put it is every 8 years, India put as many skeletons in its closet as China did during its years of shame, the years of the Great Famine. Well, if we extended that calculation worldwide, the number of people killed by capitalist democracy would be colossal. Mm-hmm. Well, it's talked about in the case of China, but in the West, you wouldn't talk about it in the case of, say, India or other capitalist democracies. Mm-hmm. So in France, there's a best-selling book, the Livre Noir, about the crimes of communism, but there's no comparable one about the crimes of the West. Mm-hmm. And if there were, the people would be denounced as crazed radicals, or Marxists, or whatever the next term of use is. Mm-hmm. 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 So figuring out who killed most people is not a simple matter.
But in terms of countries attacking other countries?
Well, then it's the United States, right? Just there's no competition.
No competition. Okay. So
I should say that this is understood in much of the world. So, for example, take the Arab world, an area of great concern. There have been polls of public opinion in the Arab world, Western polls, reliable. The most recent was released a few months ago by the Brookings Institute, a very reputable institute. It was the latest of a regular poll of Arab opinion. One of the questions that people were asked is, what are the most dangerous countries? They mean to the region. But what are the most dangerous countries to the region?
Mm-hmm.
Well, according to Western propaganda, the most dangerous country is Iran.
Mm-hmm.
According to Arab public opinion, only 10% picked Iran.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was about 80% picked the United States, and I think 88% picked Israel
Mm-hmm.
as the most dangerous countries to the region.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, opposition to and fear of U.S. policy is so high that a majority, 57%, said the region would be better off if Iran had nuclear weapons as a deterrent.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not an opinion that gets expressed in the West.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, in the United States, where I checked, when this study came out, it was reported in only one daily newspaper,
Mm-hmm.
the Washington Times, which is a secondary newspaper in
Mm-hmm.
Washington,
Mm-hmm.
not a national newspaper.
So the press doesn't really report
Not things like that.
nothing like that. So how do we fix the press?
Well, I mean, with pressure on the press makes a difference. You can change the general intellectual culture, which
Mhm.
makes a difference. So there was an effect of the 60s activism, which did civilize the country in many respects. It had an effect on the press. And for
Mhm.
one thing, reporters grew up in that environment.
Mhm.
They're changed. There are things they would write now that they wouldn't write before.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is to set up alternative media,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know of any other ways to approach this issue.
Alternative media like Democracy Now,
For example,
for example? Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised if they reported it.
Yeah. Great.
I mean, I know that some of the alternative journals did, like Z Magazine, because I
Yeah.
heard about it.
Okay. A little bit about Palestine here. Since I'm young, when I switch on TV, I hear, the stories about Israel and Palestine and the big mess that is, ongoing. Why is that so important? Why is the conflict over there so important and so present in the news? Because there are bigger conflicts in the world, where more people are suffering, but we don't hear those. We just are mainly here.
Well, this is the one of two cases, the most important of two cases, where a state is illegally occupying the territory of another people.
Mm-hmm.
This is one, Morocco and the Western Sahara is the other. Now, there have been others in the past, but right now these are the two. And Israel-Palestine is much more in the center of ongoing events that doesn't, not the Western Sahara is important, but it doesn't affect the global affairs the way Israel-Palestine does.
Mm-hmm.
A further reason is that in the case of Israel-Palestine, this is the longest occupation ever, probably.
Mm-hmm.
A nation is basically being destroyed, which is a rare event in history.
Mm-hmm.
The occupation is totally illegal. There's no question about it. In the case of Western Sahara, maybe you can argue, but in this case, Israel itself recognized that it's not that anything done in the occupied territories, like building houses and so on, is a crime. They recognized that back in 1967. And crucially, this is a U.S. crime.
Mm-hmm.
That makes it very important. The U.S. is the most important country in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever Israel does is with the quite decisive military, economic, diplomatic, and in fact ideological support of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a major event. Of course, it has plenty of repercussions in the region. I mean, that's why you have the kinds of Arab opinions that I described.
Mm-hmm.
And what Arab opinion is not insignificant. Maybe the Western press doesn't want to report it, but it's significant.
Yeah. So I heard in the news recently, I think it was with Mr. Lieberman, he was asked if the settlements were illegal or not.
This is Avigdor Lieberman.
Yeah. And I think he said that it was not really clear if it was not really clear if it was illegal or not.
It's about as clear as anything can be in international law. For one thing, Israel's own legal advisors, including its Attorney General, recognized in 1967 explicitly and advised the Israeli government that any transfer of populations to the occupied territories would be in violation of the Geneva Conventions, core of international humanitarian law. There have been repeated Security Council resolutions repeating that. And with regard to Jerusalem, it's doubly illegal. For one thing, its expansion into the occupied territories. For another thing, the Security Council has had specific Security Council resolutions on annexation, it's quasi-annexation of Jerusalem, in fact, any modification of the status of Jerusalem. Now, that was long enough ago, so the U.S. signed them too. There was a time when the U.S. was part of the world on this issue, back in the late 60s. For another thing, there's a World Court decision. There is an advisory opinion of the World Court a few years ago which concluded that any settlement in the occupied territories was in violation of the Geneva Conventions. That was essentially unanimous. The U.S. Justice had a separate declaration, but in his separate declaration he agreed with his. So I don't know how much more evidence there could be that something's illegal. That's everything, basically.
Okay. So you seem to know all the facts about a lot of different things, you know, economy, foreign policy. How do you do that? I mean, how do you keep it? First of all, you know the latest facts, and you know a lot of them. You know, you have a lot of depth as well. How do you do it?
No special tricks.